All right. So actually, when we first had thought of this panel, it was just actually me and Adrian. But then I had a little call with them, and they have very good chemistry. How do you all stay friends for so many years? Never fight, ah?
Don't disturb each other.
Don't disturb each
Yeah,
other.
so
Okay.
try not to call him out only when we have food
To eat
available.
lamb rack at a Japanese
Yes,
restaurant.
of
Wow,
course.
as somebody in the food industry, that really stresses me out.
Yeah. In fact, we just went to the place where the Japanese restaurant where they had amazing lamb racks. They stopped selling it already, so we are very upset.
Maybe you guys should start a TikTok channel, These unique things to order at unique places.
But of course, just to clarify, we are not into the food business today. Yeah?
No, not at all. But yes, so thank you so much for joining us. I have the privilege of taking the worst slot in the day, 4 o'clock. So lucky they are very entertaining. But we're actually here to talk a bit more about ecotourism. So I think it's a nice segue from the talk just now. And of course, Big Tiny, you might most be familiar with Big Tiny, I think, because of the Lazarus project. I think it's called Leisure at Lazarus, and they have some units there. You can go between 150, 170 square feet. They're all eco-friendly spaces. So it's really about using, how do you have ecotourism with modern comforts, I think. There's a lot of misconception that eco-traveling or, has to be uncomfortable. You have to camp and you have to go and hunt for food. I think a lot of people think it's like that still in their heads. And you guys are doing a very good job in changing perceptions. And but a bit more background about you guys. Correct me if I'm wrong. Singapore company started in 2017. You guys are very much pioneers in this space, using tiny homes that are eco-friendly in rural environments. So using the communities that you work with to sort of create an ecosystem that is not only sustainable, but scalable, profitable. So from a business point of view, it's not just about doing charity, but actually creating a sustainable business that can create long-lasting impact.
Yeah.
So maybe we can start from there. Maybe in your own words, tell me a bit more about what do you think ecotourism is? What is sustainable travel? What does it mean when people say, oh, I'm an eco-tourist company or a sustainable company? What does that mean?
So initially, we wanted to introduce Big Tiny as an ecotourism company that curates experiential accommodation with tiny houses on wheels. But just now I heard about ecotourism, greenwashing, right? So I started to think whether should I introduce it that way. But of course, defining ecotourism to us, I would say in my words, it's more towards the environment impact and also the local community. So later I'll explain a bit more.
Yeah, I think very good point brought up by Leon. Amazing talk, by the way. Sorry, a bit late because of the traffic. But to me personally, I think there's a responsibility to not greenwash. And of course, on our end, we are always trying our best to do that. So Lazarus Island is the project in Singapore, and we are actually certified by the Global Sustainability Tourism Council. So very proud that that's our very first project that is certified to be sustainable. And then, of course, we try our ways to not greenwash, of course. So we do practical things, for example, like planting trees whenever people book tiny houses, stays with us, for example. And we sell tiny houses as well. So when they buy a particular tiny house, we plant 10 trees in deforested areas. When they stay one night, we also plant a tree to sort of give back to the environment. And of course, to me, sustainable travel, a very important aspect is actually accessibility, because a lot of times people might think that traveling sustainably would mean a higher cost. So we are trying to basically introduce that and make sure as many people as well can participate in this green travel. So making it accessible, making it known to them so that consciously or unconsciously, they might be doing their part for the environment without them knowing.
Yeah, so maybe we can start at the beginning. Tell us a bit about when you first conceived this idea, how it came about, how did you convince somebody somewhere to put a small house? Now people are very into micro homes and tiny homes. You see on YouTube people doing it. So it's a lot more conversations around it. But when you guys started in 2017, I would imagine it was not very common. It was not very known. How did you kick it off the ground?
Maybe when we talk about fundamentally on what is an ecotourism, just I mentioned 2 points, right? One is actually it must have low impact to the environment itself. So the business, when we first started, we were actually thinking of using tiny houses on wheels. So why tiny houses on wheels? It's actually because it's actually a lower footprint. It's smaller by nature to begin with. And on top of that, when we are actually putting tiny houses on wheels into the location itself, we try to minimize or I would say have zero tree cutting in the development itself. It's just on wheels, we pull it into location, and then we can actually rent it out to city dwellers itself. So that is actually minimal impact to the environment. And of course, the second point, if we talk about local community, the whole unique thing about the whole business is that we work very closely with local hosts in Australia. So what happens is that we have a lot of hosts which are farm owners, vineyard owners, horse riding centers, for example. We work with them, put the tiny house onto their land, and then rent it out to city dwellers. And that's where we involve the locals, for the locals there, and we do a profit share with our land partner. So that actually helps to build up the local community using tiny houses on wheels. And of course, bringing them into the whole ecosystem of ecotourism and being a micro-hoteler.
So when you first started, what were some of the challenges that you guys faced?
So I guess the first thing is that why did we even start, right? Yeah. So maybe a hands, maybe let me throw the question back to the audience itself. A show of hands. Who of you guys are always working 24/7, looking at your WhatsApp, email, or even you realize your spouse or your kids always looking at the phone itself? Show of hands, please. Right? So that is actually what we feel as well. We wanted people to reconnect closer to nature, having a digital detox. But of course, being Singaporeans like ourselves, we wanted something a bit more comfortable, not just doing camping or glamping. So that was why we decided to use tiny houses on wheels. And that will allow us to have a queen-size bed, we have a hot water shower, and even air condition. Of course, air condition may not be as green as we thought, but there must be a certain element of comfort in the whole business itself.
So speaking of which, so in the construction of a tiny home, how is do you guys use sustainable material? What is the sourcing? How long does it take to build a home? How do you ensure that it continues to be sustainable and comfortable at the same time?
Okay. So maybe local sourcing, sourcing of material itself. Of course, when we are looking for suppliers, they will have green certificates. The material must be long-lasting, etc., etc. It's not wood material that we are using. So fundamentally, when it comes to sourcing of materials, that's what we look at. Then, of course, when it comes to construction of the tiny house itself, we actually prefab in Malaysia and then flat pack it like IKEA furniture, but it's the IKEA furniture for a house, ship over to the respective countries that we are in, and over there we hire the locals to build according to the standards in their country itself. So the whole process, I would say, from end to end, when a person places an order for a house itself, it will take 3 months in total, from building, deployment, and going live in their country itself.
Wow, BTOs take 5 years. You guys take 3 months.
But it's a tiny home.
Yeah.
Queen bed is a pretty comfortable. But speaking of tiny homes, so when you first started, was it difficult to convince consumers to give this a try?
I think we were lucky enough. Back then on Netflix, there was this very popular Tiny House Nation, hosted by John and Zach. So that I think helped us quite a bit. But of course, I think to a lot of people, tiny houses are something new, especially to Asians like us. Although we may be already living in tiny houses ourselves in Singapore and Hong Kong, but I think it's the thought actually of being able to have nature at your doorstep. So really opening up and stepping out into nature. And of course, with each tiny house location, we do curate the activities that our guests can get to enjoy. So you may be learning to ride a horse in one of our destinations, and another one you may be fishing in the middle of a lake, or you'll be harvesting fruits or tasting wines on a vineyard. So although it's relatively unknown, the traction gained quite quickly as we went along, and we were very fortunate to be always featured on Australia's travel magazines as well. Yeah.
So I'm on that topic. I'm curious. So how did you get into the Australian market? What was the thought process? I mean, you guys are completely local based. You're a Singapore company. So I guess the reason I'm asking is that a lot of times businesses that are in Singapore, we tend to think we have to be here. We tend to think that we think a little bit smaller because we are here. But you guys did a very good job of thinking of an idea, finding a big market, and just going for it. So talk us through that process.
I think the interesting thing the common question that we always receive is that, do you study in Australia? That's why you have contacts there. And the second common question is that, do you have girlfriends there? That's why you started the business easier. But interestingly, we had none there. So what we believe is always, it's an idea, but even though we do not have the contacts there, we have to try. And of course, it's never easy to start. Even though we talk about working with landowners in Australia itself, traveling over to Australia, we had zero contact. When we talk to land partner, we have zero land or zero tiny house in Australia. So when we talk to land partners saying that we want to put a tiny house there, do a profit share with you, you do not need to foot any bill. The question is always, is it too good to be true? Right, what's the catch? But to be honest, there's really no catch. So it's hard when it's actually the first 2 to 3 units. But the moment we have a couple of units in Australia, there's proven track record, there are reviews from our land partners as well, and that makes things a bit easier.
Interesting. So, okay, so obviously from the construction bit, it's sustainable and all of that, but now how do you measure the kind of impact you're making? So you talked a bit about planting the trees. Is that a way that in which you sort of put back what you took? Was that the idea behind it? And like, what else are you guys doing to sort of continue growing the sustainable ecosystem? Are you moving downstream, upstream? What is the vision?
So basically, the planting of trees is one way that we are trying to also give back to the environment. Of course, we don't cut trees at the start. Another thing that we're doing, of course, with the tiny houses on Lazarus Island is also the energy monitoring, because we are aiming to go net energy zero by 2030. So the 5 tiny houses on Lazarus itself, they are powered primarily by solar and only cutting into the grid if it's not enough. So we are monitoring the energy consumption of the guests when they stay over. We are also trying out other forms of harnessing energy, like wind energy in Australia, not in Singapore, for example, and a lot of other ways. So it's always continuous R&D. And of course, in the Lazarus Island tiny house, because it's closer to where we are, we also do pilot trials, like we have a food biodigester in the tiny houses. So any leftover food that you may have, or from prepping the food, you throw them into the biodigester, it changes to compost within 24 hours. Yep. And then, of course, something that we cannot do here is, of course, the concept of composting toilets, which is more suitable for Australia environment. So what happens is our land partners will collect the compost and put it into a bigger compost bin for it to change to fertilizers, and then you can use it to fertilize the crops that they have on site. Yeah.
Very circular, very
circular.
So Lazarus is what version of this tiny home? Would you say like version 4, version 5?
If you talk about the EcoTech, probably version 4, version 5. If you talk about the tiny house models, which we have experimented over the years, maybe model number 12 or 13.
Wow, so do you guys have any experience in construction, or was that like from scratch you had to figure this out? A bit like how he had to figure out the ocean. Did you guys have to figure out construction?
So the story that I always share is I was trying to change a doorknob back at home, and I thought it was easy. I managed to buy it, but that was where I stopped. Once I buy it, I remove it, I call the locksmith over. So that's the background for myself in construction itself. So no background
Very
in
sharp
construction.
learning curve.
Yeah. For me, it's even better. I don't even bother to buy the doorknob. I just call the guy straight. Yeah, so none of the 3 of us have any background. But our third co-founder, Dave, he actually went for a tiny house workshop, tiny house building workshop and all that. So we have zero experience like Leon. So for myself, I majored in marketing from NUS. And then, of course, Adrian was real estate. Yeah.
So my background is actually in real estate. So in terms of land optimization, how to leverage and make full use of land, that's my forte.
Very nice. I asked this question because I think a lot of times we have ideas, whether it's in sustainable or as entrepreneurs, but it's taking that first step, right? So without having any knowledge, you guys have managed to come this far. So in the same way, in the same vein, if you have a thought or you have an inspiration, it's very interesting to see that you can actually figure the rest out. Because clearly what drove you guys is the passion for it, right? You guys obviously saw a need in the market. You're very passionate about what you do. So that's very nice to see. Yeah, and then I want to find out a little bit more about how you guys work with local communities. I think that's a big part of sustainable. So you did mention about experiences. How else do you hope to work with local communities around the region or wherever you guys are at to continue this conversation about sustainable tourism?
I think what is important to us is actually building this whole ecosystem that evolves around this micro hotel, for example. So we talk about tiny away or big tiny, actually putting the tiny houses with land partners itself. That's actually one part of the ecosystem. The other part of the ecosystem is that in Singapore's context, for example, we do have Singaporeans who are actually interested to be part of this ecotourism, be part of the micro-hotelers. But how do they do that in Singapore's context, or even when they do not have experience itself? So that's why we actually came out with a program that allow people to buy the tiny house and we manage on their behalf. So that's actually how we help the different aspect of stakeholders building and forming this ecosystem in the tiny house side of things. Then, of course, if you talk about local community itself, besides getting, so now we have actually evolved, besides putting tiny houses into single locations, we are building clusters of tiny houses as well. We are building escapes, which is around 20 to 30 houses in a particular location itself. For such location, we can actually work better with local merchants nearby, curating the experiences for our guests itself. But of course, the experience actually for merchants around the escape that we have. So that's how we actually work together with the local community to actually build up this whole business together.
Okay, so it sounds like it's very, it's a lot of work when you guys find a community to work with and to get into that. So does that hinder your scalability a little bit, do you think?
I would say not really. So we have country managers, we have state managers as well that help to do the outreach. And most of the time, because the hosts are very sociable, so they do share around, and each host also has a story to tell. And when they work with us, they also share with others how they feel the working relationship with us is like. Yeah, so it is quite easy to do the outreach programs. Yeah.
And I think in terms of scalability, something interesting about tiny houses on wheels is that if you are investing into property, investing into physical real estate, every time we talk about location, location, location. But for us, tiny houses on wheels is that, hey, I park into a vineyard, for example, for some reason, the occupancy is bad. Nobody is renting it out. I can easily pull it to another location, which may have better demand. So in a way, we are not wasting, we are not building something from scratch and tear it down. For us, it's pulling it to the location, moving it to another if it doesn't work well. So in terms of scalability and sustainability, I think it works well for us in this case.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And like you said, it's modular, right? So it really required it to be flat packed again and then shipped somewhere else that's possible
Yes,
as well.
that's right.
So what are some challenges you face then, that you foresee in your day-to-day? What are some things that keep you up at night?
Yeah, lots of
Besides one meal to eat next, okay? Not counted.
no girlfriend in Australia, didn't study in Australia. So I think interestingly is that we are always on the lookout for good land partners in Australia. So on a monthly basis, we actually receive almost 1,000 requests wanting to host the tiny house with us, not just in Australia, New Zealand, Europe. Altogether, we receive 1,000. But on a monthly basis, we will deploy 30 to 40. So the challenge for us is how do we find good land partners and how do we get more people involved into this business itself?
Oh, so that's interesting. So you did mention Europe. So is the European market different from the Australian market? Is that like, do you have to rethink some things, or is it really just a plug and play model? How does it differ?
I would think basically it would be the culture, of course, barring the regulations on site and all that. The culture is slightly different as well. So for example, in Australia, majority of our guests are actually couples or friends and all that. So European, maybe we're seeing a little bit more of a family. So that's why also, for example, the tiny house models that we deploy in the European market is bigger. We have 252 square feet units, for example. And then in Australian market, the more popular model will be the 137 square foot single level unit. So slight differences. Yeah.
So in Europe as well, you source out spaces to put these tiny homes in, and then it's like on farms and things like that. So it doesn't really, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't really eat into the housing crisis. Is that one of the ways to look at it? Because I know like in countries like Italy and Spain, it's a very big conversation, right, about the housing crisis, over tourism.
Yeah.
So are you guys adding to that or abating that, or how does that work?
I think not just in Europe itself. Australia is also facing a housing crisis, for example. Recently, they even implemented ways to prevent foreigners from, just yesterday, they implemented measures to prevent foreigners from buying properties per se. But using tiny house on wheels, if we look into it, it provides an alternative for the locals itself if they are buying it for their own use. For example, in Australia, we do have a lot of inquiries calling our local subsidiaries saying that, hey, instead of buying a property, getting my kids out to another property, why not I get my kids out, stay in a tiny house on the property itself?
Just kick them out, but to the garden.
Yes, I didn't use that word. Yep. Because that's the culture. The moment they hit 18, they will want to be out. And because of the real estate prices shooting up too high, instead of buying another property or renting another property, a good way is actually to stay on the same farm, but in a tiny house outside, and they still have their own privacy. And of course, COVID plays a good part as well, where they're also working from home. So we do have locals buying tiny houses on wheels from us in order to use it as a workstation or an office in their farm itself.
Now I have a very silly question. Are the homes stackable?
Technically, it is possible. Yeah, of course, with all the right calculations and the loading calculations and all that. Yeah.
So actually we have, so the technical details is that within the team, they have actually used foundation, or the foundation of the panels itself can actually stack up to 2-story. So they have done the calculation, they have done the testing. It can be done, but we have not done it before.
No, because the reason I ask is, and I'm just throwing it out there. This could be a very interesting solution for housing, right? I would imagine in developing countries where you have slums,
Yep.
the same kind of big, huge slum states, like for example in South America and India, where it can be easily converted into stackable tiny homes. Is that something you guys have considered? Is that something you know, is it in line with the kind of work you do? And not just throwing it out there, because there's a lot of, I guess this is a very easy solution to a very difficult problem. To get people from the slum environment to actually having a proper home sanitation, basic amenities, right?
I mean, if we look into a long-term, or we sidetrack from the ecotourism side of things, within the business itself, we have a built unit, or built business unit itself, where we decided to build a house, or we designed the house where it's modular. It's like IKEA furniture, or it's like a Lego style where it could be added. Although now it's a tiny house, it can be longer, it can be wider by adding more panels itself. And our objective was actually not towards the slum. It can be done, but there will be some tweaks needed in terms of the materials used, etc. The materials used at the moment is actually more for tourism, it's actually more upmarket, for instance. But it is actually possible for the house to be shipped into a household, and people could actually receive it like the IKEA furniture and assemble it at their backyard. So that is definitely possible.
Okay, so I guess in terms of sustainability and ecotourism, that's of course one big area in which there can be improvement. But from what I'm hearing, actually it could also be helpful in elevating people's lives in different ways. So that's a bigger vision or a bigger concept as well. But I mean, since we are talking about sustainable tourism and ecotourism, what are some challenges you see convincing people? Because from what I imagine and from what I read, it appeals to a certain generation, I think. But there are still generations, and I'll give you an example. I sat with my father today, so I work in a family business. He's my dad, but also my boss. And we were having a conversation about this, and he was not impressed. To him, it's like, I'm not going to pay so much money to live on a farm. Then got restaurants nearby or not? Then eat what? I said, Daddy, cook lah. Home also must cook. Go holiday also must cook. So I would imagine that generation is a little bit tougher to convince. Do you guys see that as well? What's your demographic like? What are the kinds of people that use these homes, and how are you changing that?
Yeah, I would say that you're exactly right. So we appeal slightly more to the younger people. And of course, but I would say that to answer to your question, we try to accommodate as many people as we can in our target audience. So it may be about the curation of interesting activities that they too would find pleasure in participating in. So just back to your topic about cooking, for example. So if we do have some land partners who offer cooked breakfasts, and the ingredients are actually harvested from around the area or around the region itself. So that makes for a very authentic cooked meal if you do not wish to cook yourself, for example. Yeah, so these are the things that we always try to suss out and try to curate for our guests, so that we hope to welcome each and every one from all different age groups to stay in our houses.
So it's very, very thoughtful process, I would imagine. Not like other hotels where it's really just about finding the land, building it, and then selling it. But you guys do a very good job, I think, of thinking through the customer journey when they stay there. And also that's wonderful. But speaking of which, like, do you foresee yourself working with the bigger brands like the Marriotts of the world? Do you consider them your competitors, or do you consider them your collaborators? How do you fit into this space?
Actually, we don't see ourselves as competing with them. We are actually creating a new space in terms of having people connecting closer to nature and yet providing the comfort, which at the moment, we are also working with Merit. So Merit is actually one of our partners where we lease our tiny houses on their platform itself, allowing them to share this aspect of the business with their members.
Okay, so you collaborate with them and then you sort of tap on their network to grow yourselves as well.
Yeah. To
So now
introduce,
personal-
I guess, more variety.
So now
to
personal
people.
question, which is your favorite tiny home in the world?
Do you have
You have to
favorites?
choose one.
Choose one.
Yes.
I love Singapore, so must be Lazarus.
Really?
This is closer to
Not
home.
the one on the
Okay,
vineyard or not the one in the lake with the fishing?
So actually, to be very honest, it's hard to choose because for us, we have tiny houses in the different categories. Like for example, we have tiny houses which is with a valley view. We have tiny houses which is up on the hilltop. We have tiny houses which is by the lake. Depending on what kind of experience you are looking at.
Lazarus, you would
Lazarus, I would say, is easily accessible. Being in Singapore context, I'm flying Australia next week. I have an opportunity to stay in 5 different tiny houses when I'm there as well.
say? Okay.
So
You guys,
I'm taking my
you
time
guys
to
need to
choose.
start a TikTok channel or something to show the rest of the world where these are your own little experiences as founders. What
Yeah.
about you? What's your favorite tiny home? If you could only pick one.
I think my answer will be the same as Adrian as well. So basically, before we actually completed the development, we had a trial stay. So the whole company's staff went to stay. So I brought my family, and then they requested that I book another time. So I went again a second time, and then each time they were just asking like, "Daddy, why you only book one night instead of 2 nights or 3 nights?" I said, because you need to give others a chance to try, because the occupancy rate is quite high, it's about 90%. There's a 2 to 3 months waiting time currently for the houses. But I mean, what I really enjoy is because the story behind, because I'm from marketing, so I like places with story. So for Lazarus Island itself, it was previously inhabited by villagers who stayed on the island itself. We were lucky enough to host the entire group of villagers who used to stay there in our tiny houses as well. We invited them back for a reunion. They stayed in our houses. They shared their story. So I felt that there's a bit of knowing more about your roots, being Singaporeans, about the place and how it developed and changed over time. But of course, having said that, we have a lot of wonderful houses. You can check them out at tiny.away, our social media handle. There you'll see a lot of very nice videos that are actually contributed by our guests themselves voluntarily. So they film their stay, they film the activities they do online there, and then they post it online for everyone to see. So this is something that we feel very happy about, that they went there, they stayed, they loved it, and they are actually sharing their own story with the rest of the people. Because something that we find really important, of course, other than disconnecting from our daily digital life, is the connection. Because when you are there, disclaimer here, some of our tiny houses do not have Wi-Fi. So you are really present there, you are really connected with the person that you are traveling with. So that's the connection that we are looking out for, in addition to connection with nature, in connection with yourself and all that. So there's some aspect that we are very happy about that our business has brought us to.
And adding to that, something interesting was that the youngest islander who attended the gathering with us, right? He is currently a boatman that ferries people from the ferry terminal to Lazarus Island. And he has his own kid, and he was booking the tiny houses for, I think, the 3rd time whenever he has any celebration. So that's the story that Jeff is mentioning, the connection, that people are still interested to go back to Lazarus just because they stayed there before.
Yeah, I mean it's a paradise away from home for a lot of people. I mean, I've personally also visited one at Lazarus, and it's amazing. Like, it's comfortable. You forget that you are in something. Sustainability is there, but it's not like front and center. It's just being done in the background while you're having a good time, which I think is very important. Back to your point about storytelling and marketing, right? It's not in your face sustainable, and it's overturning the fact that it doesn't have to be uncomfortable. I think a lot of people think that in order to be sustainable, you have to be uncomfortable, but that's something you guys are doing differently. So let's talk a bit more about, we've already shared so much about the beauty of these places. So if somebody wants to buy a house, how does it work?
Somebody wants to buy. We have the
Call Jeff.
agreements ready in our handphone. Just kidding.
Oh, that really?
Yeah. I mean, Big Tiny is actually a holding group. So under Big Tiny, the subsidiary is Build Tiny. So Build Tiny is our design and construction arm. But of course, people can actually buy a tiny house from us if you're interested to start this journey of becoming a micro hotelier. So it's all about just getting a house from us, deciding which country you want to place it in. So we are in 19 countries, 19 different countries. Yeah. So buying a house and then we can actually manage it for you without you guys lifting a finger, because I mean, being Singaporeans, we love our properties and all our investment and everything, but dealing with tenants, dealing with all the different agreements is an issue that we foresee ourselves and we don't really like it. So we've sort of taken the hassle out of that. So any of you who are interested to buy houses, you can approach us anytime.
Yes, they have a model house in their office as well.
Yeah, we have a
So you can go and knock on the wood. You can make sure it's sturdy enough. Take your measuring tape. Make sure you're getting the size they promised you and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, you guys have managed to monetize it as well. So it's not just about, like a hotel where you stay Airbnb, but you're actually taking very old world concepts of real estate, time sharing, and putting it into a new business model, which I think is very interesting for businesses who want to be sustainable to also think how to make it profitable, right? Then only you can make the highest impact, I think, is that if your sustainable business is also sustainable itself. So let's talk a bit about the travel eco industry. Where do you see, ecotourism? Is it something that is growing? Clearly there's demand, but what is next when it comes to sustainable travel, ecotourism? What do you wish that there was more of in the industry? What do you think that the industry is lacking? What can be done from a macro perspective?
I think if you ask me, there'll be more certifications that will be oncoming. So like GSTC is one of it. So the questions for us is how green are we? Is there a measurable test that we could take? So that would be first. Second, I would think that besides minimizing impact to the environment, building for the community, the next stage should be more towards regenerative sustainability. How do we do not just lesser impact, but how can we do better to make it better in the environment itself? That will be what will be moving ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit about what Leon was saying as well, right? It's not about reducing the negative, then going back to status quo, but how to make the status quo better. Like how do you add back to that? And that's a big part, I think, of tourism. So do you guys collaborate with other brands that are also in the ecotourism space? Not the communities itself, but like other brand partners that are in the same space? How does that work? Is it a collaborative environment? Is it very isolated at the moment? What is the space like?
So I think starting from the very basics is like, for example, the guest amenities that we provide our guests in the guest house. They are also green companies as well. So like, for example, they do not use disposable plastics, packaging and all that, biodegradable, fully organic shampoo, body lotion. Other more fun gaming aspects, we also collaborated with this Australian gaming company where they are about sharing with you what are the species and biodiversity that's around our tiny houses. And there's an app where you can actually learn more about all these species, where they're nesting, for example, how you should interact with them when you actually encounter. So all these are actually our little ways where we collaborate with other like-minded brands or individuals to further propagate the green agenda.
Nice, okay. So I think there's a lot of room for thinking outside of just your own industry, like, home, but how do you follow through the whole ecosystem, right? I guess one way would be having EVs to bring you there rather than, diesel emissions and stuff like that. So if somebody wanted to start their ecotourism journey, what would be some advice you would give them? Like, besides choosing where to stay, what else do you have to take into consideration to actually be a true sustainable traveler? Do you guys work with airlines, or how do you measure, right, is my question? Because staying in one property, but to get there, you already probably emitted a lot. And to get to rural areas, you probably have to go even further than the usual. And then the same journey back. How do you build like a ecosystem? How does one as a traveler think about these things? How do you guys think about it?
I think maybe Leon will not be happy, but carbon offsets. If you travel with all the bigger airlines and all that, you can offset your carbon and all that. But I also think that maybe easier things start with the recycling of your waste that you bring along. The way you actually interact with the environment and all that would also play an important role. Yeah, so in Australia, we are also trying to partner up with EV companies as well. And we also are looking at having EV chargers at our larger scale escapes where there's 20 to 30 tiny houses. Yeah.
Any plans to put your tiny homes on wheels, like literally, so that they can be driven around like a caravan?
Our tiny house actually on wheels.
Yep.
They don't have an engine, right?
And they can be driven around like a caravan.
So if somebody wanted to
But it's
actually,
actually towed rather than
Yeah,
being
it's
driven
so
around.
somebody wanted to do like a road trip on it, would that be possible?
Okay, so fundamentally it's a bit different. Caravans are actually meant to be towed on a daily basis. It's smaller in size. But for tiny houses on wheels, it's a bit bigger. So it's harder to tow it around. So we do have a lot of clients coming to us or guests coming to us saying that, can I tow a tiny house? So we will usually refer them to do caravan instead, because that will be safer.
I mean, technically it's possible.
Yep.
I mean,
Technically it is possible.
Yeah, our tiny houses all meet the road going regulations, so you won't risk it being a convertible once you go across a overhead bridge and stuff like that. Yeah, yeah. But I guess for us, when we first started this business, we were looking at the perfect travel or the perfect holiday experience, because I think as Singaporeans, we are not used to having something so big behind us, so it makes you really stressed out. And plus, for example, if you are holidaying with your wife and your wife wants to make a sudden detour to a shopping center in town, you can't bring the tiny house into town because there's only specific areas where you can park. So in order to circumvent this, what we are doing is actually to have more tiny houses dispersed all throughout, so that you can just rent a normal EV, for example, rest and relax at our tiny house, and you're moving into town, you can just take your EV and drive into town, do your necessary shopping, and head back. So rather than having it behind you, though I think we have a dream that we wanted to fulfill
Expected that.
since we started, where we wanted to tow a tiny house all the way from our Malaysia factory up to Thailand and as far as we can go on a road trip to show people. Because this morning we just had a meeting, and then our team was sharing with us about how our tiny house drivers, they are actually deploying on their way to deploy the tiny house to the designated site. How when they stop at the petrol kiosk, they'll always be swarmed by people like, hey, what is this? This is so interesting. So it's a way, I guess, of also sharing this with the people we meet along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds like a great adventure to do. And the reason I ask is because, like, especially in places like America, where the caravan culture is very big, I would imagine that's another industry that is quite disruptable as well, using these kind of homes instead of the caravans, which are actually very emitting as well, because of the kind of scale they are, the kinds of, I mean, the whole journey of using a caravan is actually quite bad for the environment. So this could be an interesting segue. I'm just gonna do a quick time check. Okay, maybe we can have some questions. I think that'll be quite interesting. Should we open the floor? Yeah.
So I just realized that actually I follow Tiny Away. I've followed you guys for quite a while now.
Thank you.
I have a question about, so I know that modular kind of design and modular housing is really becoming more and more popular, especially in Europe, America. But say in the larger markets like Australia, what were the challenges in finding local suppliers that could kind of prefabbricate these designs for you? I mean, my understanding is that it comes from Malaysia, right?
Yep.
And it gets shipped to Australia.
Actually, to be very honest, when we first started this business in Australia itself, that was in 2017, where tiny houses are getting traction in the States, but Australia, not a lot of people know about it. So it was very hard to find builders that could support building a tiny house per se. So when it comes to ordering 1 to 2 units a month, I think it's still feasible. But when it comes to scale to 30, 50 units a month, local builders will be a bit hard to sustain the demand. So that was why we went back to the drawing board. We thought it's time to take our drawer plan to actually trigger more a modular way of building things. So that was why when we set up the factory in Malaysia, it was actually to design the tiny house into a modular panel system where it could be flat pack and shipped to any countries that we are expanding. So that is a good thing for us, because when it's shipped into Australia, we could easily get builders or tradesmen who have building experience or who knows how to handle a tool. They could easily assemble up the whole house for us. But of course, when it comes to electrical and plumbing works, we have to get the certified electricians and plumbers to do that. So the same goes when we're expanding the market to Taiwan, to Europe. It was easier for us to find builders that could assemble up the whole house itself.
So just to build on that, so when somebody orders a home, is it a built-to-order kind of service where you only make it on demand, or do you have like ready-made stock that you keep?
So actually the ideal world for us is always people order, we collect the deposit, we place an order in Malaysia factory, ship over and build up. But that's the ideal world. But for us, usually we will build our panels in Malaysia because there's always an advantage buying in bulk, continuing the production since we have a team there. So the good news is that the team is still coping with demand, is still trying to build to catch up for the demand in Singapore itself. People are still very interested in tiny houses, and that's the good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it helps with your cost in the end as well,
Yep.
right? Because if you can order in advance, you can keep stock in a way. It's definitely better. Any more questions?
I have a question. I'm actually quite curious to want to learn a little bit more about the micro hotels that y'all mentioned earlier. And in an ideal situation where, let's say, if resources were not constrained, how are you thinking around micro hotels, regenerative tourism, and how can like consumers like ourselves, as we join you and be part of your journey, how are you thinking about that in an ideal world? Let's say if we think forward a couple of years. I'm curious. Thank you.
Let me start. So within the whole business itself, I always say the different business units are catching up with each other from the sales perspective, from the building perspective, and finding land partners itself. So every time we build a unit or we sell a unit, we must make sure that the building can cope with it and there's a land that is actually deployed. So if resources are unlimited in your words, for example, of course we'll automate the process of building where we get machineries in, building the panels, building the tiny houses itself. There's actually automation that we have spoken to EDB as well. Then of course when it comes to getting land partners, the next stage is, I told you, we have 1,000 land partners that is in the queue. Then we do not need to choose anymore because now we have unlimited resources that could deploy unlimited tiny houses into the whole escape itself. So that will be in terms of the whole ecosystem. But when it comes to regenerative tourism, I would say ecotourism, we have seen many pieces of land in Australia that could be purchased. And on top of that, every time we are thinking of planting more trees onto the land, because Australia land is vast pieces of land that we could put 10% or a small percentage of the land for tiny houses and ecotourism, and the rest could be used for regenerative planting of trees, etc., etc. If money is not an issue, you will see a lot of trees being planted.
Yeah, well said.
We do have a lot of
Underwater
requests.
homes.
Chorus. We can partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can partner for Lazarus Island. Yeah.
Anybody else? Any more questions? No?
Yeah. So I think that's a really good question, because I think for a lot of businesses, when you start to scale, you start to lose control of the quality of the services that the business provides to the end consumers. So for Big Tiny itself, or for Tiny Away, which is our hospitality arm, what we do is we actually have an induction program for each and every one of our land partners. We also have basically right from the starting where they make the bookings, we also have our hospitality team members attending to their queries and all that. So right till they actually reach the tiny house itself, our land partners are also trained how they should be handling their guests, how they should be showing the tiny house or the activities that they provide, the food and services that they provide. And they are actually onboarded, I think, for quite a while. And then they have also a budget that they have been allocated to decorate the tiny house, to dress up the tiny house. So they also feel a sense of ownership in this whole ecosystem itself. And that actually aids the quality of the services that they provide to our guests.
And also adding on to Jeff, I think fundamentally we are building this business together with the locals itself. And we are not just saying that Why I say that is because we actually do a profit share with our land partners. By doing a profit share, they are enticed to do better. They're enticed to maintain the quality and the standards, and that will result in more bookings and, of course, more revenue for them as well.
Yep.
So that is actually our way or our little touches to make sure that everybody does well.
Yep.
I guess now you guys have built a lot of credibility, but was it difficult to build trust when you first started, given that you're not local? Clearly, it's you guys are doing this for the first time. It's very uncommon. Was it tough to convince the first few people to let you use their land, or were they very receptive?
Yep, I would say definitely it was tough. One story that I will share was that a land partner came to us with a shotgun, and he said, I could shoot you guys, because the house was ready, but we do not have a land partner yet. So myself, Dave, Jeff, we were walking around, saw a nice property after breakfast. Then we walk in, and that was the first thing we heard from the land partner. Walk some more and I will shoot you. But after a while, seated down, he was happy with what we shared, and he was actually on board as our first few land partners.
So you're still a partner? Still haven't been shot?
Not yet, not yet. Yep.
Quite invasive, right? You're like asking people to give a piece of their home in a way.
Because they don't have a doorbell, so we have to walk all the way in, knock on the door, and we trespass in a way.
Hope not to die. Anybody else? Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, I'll say the typical lifespan is about 25 to 30 years because the quality of the materials we use are higher, and we are quite dedicated to the quality of the houses that we build, so much so that we send them to Tussud for testing. So apparently our houses, not apparently, scientifically are proven that our houses can withstand about 200-kilometer winds, which is equivalent to a stage 2 cyclone. It passed the water tightness test, the waterproofing test, and all that as well. Yeah.
Where are you in terms of thinking about the end of life for the having houses?
Yep. So we do have a strategy that's actually in place. For example, if we have been monitoring to make sure that the maintenance of the house is still in good quality, etc. Based on our strategy, units within 10 to 15 years, we will actually offload to the local market so that they can use it as secondary houses, even though it does not fit into our quality as quality tourism accommodation, for example. And second, units that are still within our portfolio, we also have plans to reuse them, meaning we will refurbish them so that materials that have only a lifespan of 25 to 30 years, we will actually replace them, and the structure of the house could still be used and recycled. So within the company, there's actually the strategy for old houses in future.
Any last words? Anything? All right, well, in that case, thank you so much for joining us. If anybody has any other questions, I guess you guys will still be here.
Yep.
Yes, if anybody wants to buy a home and has a checkbook ready, they are ready to take your money.
Yeah, I have the
We take
QR
bank
code.
transfer,
Yeah.
don't worry.
Huh?
We have
We
the
take bank
pay now
Blank
QR
checks
code.
first, ah.
Pay now QR code also.
Pin out QR code, okay. You guys know where to find them. Well, yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you,
you, Big
Bandana.
Tiny,
Thank
and
you.
thank you, Bandana, so much for the